Welcome to Our Next Existence by Katie and the Chorus. I'm Katie, former technology strategist turned reluctant spiritual medium, and I channel messages from the Chorus, a group of beings just beyond our sensory perceptions who are loving, expansive, and who greatly enjoy sharing their perspective of us. Join us each week as we share and discuss their ideas about humanity's existence, purpose, and future. Concepts you can draw from to accelerate your path, expand your perceptions, and ultimately step into the flow of the universe and your life. Welcome back, everybody. Before we jump into today's topic, I want to give a couple of updates. So the first is, I'm pretty sure I mentioned a couple episodes ago that I've just been feeling inspired to do things that feel pretty illogical, like nonstop gardening or painting a wall. And I'm pretty sure I mentioned that I built a decorative AC fence. Just felt inspired, and I'd thought about it for a while living in this house. And then one day I was at Lowe's and it was the easiest thing to just grab all the materials, even though I've never built a fence before. And then I put it together. Well, in the hurricane that just blew through Sarasota, a giant tree on the side of my house basically split off a giant branch that fell right on the air conditioning unit. The fall of the branch was broken by the slats on my newly added decorative AC fence. It snapped through 1, 2, 3 slats and then was basically propped up by the debris of the fence and was gently hovering like an inch above my AC unit. So if I hadn't built an AC fence that in a matter of weeks was about to be destroyed by a giant branch, we might have lost our AC unit, but instead it was in perfect condition. So I don't know, maybe keep that in mind when you feel totally inspired to do something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Maybe it makes sense in a way that just hasn't come to pass yet. And then secondly, on the topic of last week's episode where we talked about sort of this energetic bubble that you can go into, which is really just a way of saying you shift into a slightly different frequency where different rules apply and there are different beliefs. And you could call it a bubble of safety, but really you're just not under the influence of this belief system complex in the same exact way. Well, connected to that, last night I made a salmon for dinner. And I cut these little lemon wedges because I like to squirt lemon juice on my salmon. And so I get us all at the table and we put down our dishes and I sit down and I reach for my lemon wedge and I squeeze my lemon and somehow just perfectly shoot a direct jet of lemon juice into my eye. It wasn't like a sprinkle that lands in the eye area or like you squirted your face. It was like a tiny missile of lemon juice that shot right into my eyeball. And it started burning so bad. And I pushed back from the table and I stood up and I went to go find the eye drops. By the time I started down the hallway, my eye was already crying so much. It was as much as eye drops. And eventually the lemon juice cleared out of my eye. So I am either still working on my bubble, my shift into other frequencies, or also maybe that experience here was still turned into something expansive, not destructive. And I don't know what that is yet, or maybe it's just that I laughed, which sometimes is all the expansion we need. So what should we talk about today? Some of you know from previous episodes and examples I've given over the years and on our Instagram too, I think, that sometimes the Chorus gives me a quote and it hangs out with me for a period of some time as the meaning of it slowly soaks in. I think one example I gave on our Instagram was the quote that they gave me when I was really worried right after COVID started and the world seemed to be starting to go through its shifts. I was asking about, all these very different beliefs are surfacing. And the Chorus reminded me that they're all right, meaning it's okay, everything's okay. And then they repeated the phrase again. And they said they are all right. It was their reminder of sort of the infiniteness of the infinite universe, and that we're stepping into more and different and diverse perspectives, and we're expanding into the space where there's room for all of that, to live in a harmony that's maybe unlike any harmony we've ever imagined. It soothed me that day, and I wrote it down in the first page of that journal, that sketchbook. And I looked at it over and over and over again over the course of the next year as I watched the world really kick off an era of chaos, an era of divergent opinions and stress. And I came back to that quote over and over again. They are all right. They are all right. It helped. And it helped to see it again and again as I realized in new layers what they were meaning. Well, this year I've had a different quote stuck on my computer monitor, especially as I've gone through some of these trips and met some of these new and different friends, but then also as I've lost them. The trip sort of died down. Some of my energetic connections got quieter. And some people that I felt very close to, I watched drift away. Not just in terms of, my marriage, but things since then. Friendships that I started to develop with spiritual people where, wow, I felt like I'd never been so much on the same wavelength with someone before. And I was so delighted to find these deep connections of understanding. They all sort of dispersed. And I consoled myself with the idea that, okay, everyone's on different paths and different wavelengths. There's an ebb and a flow to things, but it also felt like a very big disconnection. More than just someone was getting busy, but like I couldn't feel them anymore. I think this happens as we grow in our energetic abilities. There's a different sense of someone. You can not talk to a friend for 5 months, but you still have a sense of them. You're still able to have an awareness of them. They still pop up in your mind. In some ways, to the chorus, that represents a continued connection. But then maybe with another friend, you don't speak for 5 months and it's like you don't even feel them. You don't have any sense of where they are or what they're doing or how they're doing. It's like they're just gone. When we first begin to have these sorts of energetic sensations, the coming and going on these wavelengths can feel a little bit more impactful, perhaps, than just not talking on the phone to someone. These sensations are so much more strong than we're used to with our 5 senses perspectives. And also, they are vaster. So in some ways, awakening from this perspective, when that vast sensation goes away, it can feel like it leaves a bigger hole in its wake. So the quote that's been on this sticky on the side of my monitor now for months came from a time when I was sort of scribbling in my journal, half having a conversation with the chorus, sort of querying them, but mostly just feeling them now in the way that I do, where the feeling comes before the words. And they asked me, and this is the note on the sticky. It says, what else is in a part besides disconnection? And that drew me up short because I'd never thought of being apart as anything other than disconnection. Isn't that the definition of apart? To be separated, to be apart from someone is to be disconnected from them. So this raised a bunch of interesting questions. Perhaps that was my definition or understanding of apart because I was coming from the 5 senses. And that is, strictly speaking, the limited definition of apart. I see them with my senses and then I don't see them with my senses. We are now apart, which was basically just a way of defining the limits of our 5 senses' sensory perceptions. But what could apart mean on energetic scales? What does it mean when you feel like you have a sense of someone and then you don't? I feel like I'm still coming to this answer. So I'm not even sure I should really be recording this episode, except that it was staring me in the face today. And it's been a while since I sat down and truly had deeply not a clue what I was about to say. And this seemed like the proper black hole to jump into. So maybe let's start with what I do know. The first is a growing understanding of what the mind was built to do. As we've talked about these 2 books and these 2 seasons, the mind is a reflection of our resonance with the energies of limitation, the experience of disallowance. But to put a finer point on it, the mind was built or reflects an ability to recycle things into slightly different versions of the same. When it approaches a new topic, as we've talked about in how humans learn, the mind typically breaks it apart. This is a reflection of an energy of disconnection. By the Course's view, when you step into a new and unknown thing, you allow it to continue to unfold before your very eyes. If you stop it at that moment in time and attempt to analyze it, what you are simply doing is curtailing the manifestation that would otherwise continually unfold. This is a different concept than what we're accustomed to, especially subconsciously here, because humans have a very stop and go type of experience of the universe. When the mind enacts, we typically are freezing in time, in some ways, our perception, and then continuing to work with that instant in time's perception. This is part of how we recycled things. If the thing was continuing to evolve, it wouldn't be recycled in the same way. It wouldn't be redundant in the same way. So instead, the mind takes a snapshot, abstracts itself out of the present moment where that thing would continue to evolve, and instead turns into a mental version of reality where it starts to play with or break apart and repackage its understanding of the thing. So let's say you and I are wandering through the mountains and we see this strange metallic thing on the ground that we've never seen before. Unbeknownst to us, our mind will basically take in information for kind of a split second, as we talked about in the episode on first impressions, and then it will start to attach it to or append it to other things that are like it that we have already seen. Now, our ability to create these patterns, our ability to connect it to what has already existed in our belief system complex could be considered a connective energy. We are connecting it to all of the beliefs we already hold, but also it is disconnected from that present moment where that thing would continue to demonstrate for itself what it is. That snapshot ability is part of how reality functions here. Manifestations and all things in the universe are constantly in motion and are constantly unfolding, as is energy. So much is held the same here by way of our beliefs, including, as we've talked about, how similar we all look day to day. I look like Katie pretty much every day, minus, evidence of deterioration and aging. This is artificial by many viewpoints of other civilizations where the pace of change is much more rapid. And as we've talked about this season, including the concept of shape-shifting, where you can evolve your format or change your format by varying degrees depending on your beliefs within a matter of moments, not necessarily being required to look the same over decades or even lifetimes. So maybe this is starting to gel a little bit because you can feel some of the times you stayed open-hearted as you've gone into a situation where you're sort of like, maybe you took an unexpected trip. And because you had no expectations, you sort of walked into it just open to whatever would happen. Spiritual people often say this, I'm just open to whatever happens, which is a little bit of a way of saying, I realize that my mind wants to totally lock down the plan into a mental forecast for this entire event, but I'm going to try and stay present and allow for things that I didn't expect. This is our first steps into the idea consciously that manifestations continue to manifest. There was not a trip that got fully baked and then delivered to your door, your physical door. It's that as you appear in the present moment and continue to engage energetically and in an open way without mental assumptions, you will continue to perceive new and different things through the entirety of the trip. Perhaps even experiencing things that totally change the direction of your life because you were open to new and different ideas or actions or choices or conversations or people through the entirety of that experience. You and the trip and the environment and everything around you continue to expand energetically, you could say. Okay, so now let's go back to our concept of a relationship and an experience of being apart or disconnected in that relationship. Now I would ask the same thing. Does our mind typically view being apart as something that is a thing, relatively static, or a fluid, ongoing, evolving experience? Now you could probably feel a little bit of both, but do you feel how the mind defaults to, well, we were apart. It was a long distance relationship. Being apart sucks. The end, right? It's this sense of apart is a thing. Being apart is a thing. You don't get to see each other. You don't get to talk to each other as often. You don't get to experience what the other person experienced during their days. You don't get to feel their touch. You are apart until you are together again. And maybe things happen while you are apart, but the sense, the experience of being apart is a thing. Do you feel that? Okay. Now, move it a little bit over into this energetic context where actually there is no such definition. There is no singular definition of apart. Apart was based predominantly on the limits of 5 senses sensory perception. So then what's happening energetically when we are apart from people we love and care about? What are those other layers of energy? Okay, so think back a couple episodes, maybe several episodes now, to where we talked about the experience of distance, and you and I are flying around the planet, and I fly off to Iceland and you fly off to Bali, and now we are beyond the range of our ability to see each other. And that would be the end of the story. And then we might be like, oh no, there's this part of time where I am like away from you. But then we said, but energetically, if you could still feel me and feel everything about me in Iceland while you are in Bali or wherever you are, then we haven't actually separated. We're maybe just relying on vaster perceptions. So maybe before, when we played on the same playground and you went way to the other side of the playground and I could still see you, I felt like we were playing on the same playground because I could still see you on the playground. Well, now let's say you can go even further. You can go into the woods beyond the playground and I still feel you. So then we're still playing on the same playground. I'm just relying now on different aspects of myself to understand and know what you're up to. Okay, so now take it a step further. What happens when you can't feel me energetically? When maybe you went way off into the forest. So let's use our concept of distance, physical distance that we were talking about last week versus energetic distance, okay? So physical distance extends. You're now even further out of my eyesight, and you are also now further outside of my energetic perception. Or we can also use this example with energetic distance where you shifted into a different frequency. So I run into the forest exactly where you would have been on my frequencies, but you're not there because you vibrated into a different frequency or a different version of that forest. So now we are energetically apart. Is this the same definition? Have I simply now extended the definition of the limits of my sensory perception to an energetic version of this. And now we are apart because I am not resonant in a way where I can perceive you any longer energetically. And now we are right back to the chorus's sticky note, which says, what else is in apart besides disconnection? So there you are in your version of the forest, and here I am in my version of the forest, and I've just run off the playground trying to find you. What else is happening right now in this experience of disconnection energetically? If it's not just as simple as, well, now I can't sense you energetically either. It's another limit. We just find more and different ways of describing our limitations, which is fine. It's a valid vantage point, especially considering where we're coming from. And so now I will talk about things that I don't know, but that I feel. Varying degrees of proximity, especially in energetic wavelengths, serve different purposes. Similar to how if you and I were a handful of feet away, that's a perfect distance in order for us to speak to each other. And if you and I are further away, that is perhaps considered a perfect distance for us to throw a ball between us. There is utility in different versions and kinds of distance, particularly on energetic scales, once we are expanded beyond the simplicity of the five senses alone. There are things that are easier to accomplish, we might say. There are things that are more effectively done. And there are things that make more sense in the greater context when they are accomplished between different frequencies than others. This is a nuance of energetic playgrounds that we are just starting to awaken to. Where perhaps if you and I are accomplishing some aspect of awakening, if we are starting to feel a different skill, a different tool in our toolbox, it may make much more sense for you to go perhaps very, very far away, as we would say, to a very different frequency, and for us to engage in these energetic frequencies from those places. Movement in the five senses world had been defined by perhaps physical expressions of a needing to get done. I walk to the mailbox because, well, I need to go get the mail. And the only way to get the mail is to cross that distance to the mailbox where getting the mail is done. It is unusual in a human life to move for the joy of moving or to move for many other reasons. Movement is often, but not always, an expression of our pitch for survival. Children, and sometimes light-hearted moments of dancing, as grown-ups or at any age, are a few of the few expressions of movement that we make here for any other purpose other than the choices and the actions that our mind has made for our next most effective or efficient or accomplishing step. In energetic scales, in energetic frequencies, there are many other experiences that are accomplished by movement and by shifting between the frequencies themselves. You could consider it sort of like varying flavors of spice or recipes, where perhaps if you expand into these 2 or 3 frequencies or jet over to those 5 frequencies, it will create a very different version of whatever it is that you are experiencing or accomplishing on energetic scales. This nuance is very far beyond the capabilities of the mind, because at its current representation, the mind is not built for this kind of connectedness. In order to navigate the frequencies of energy, the heart's compass or your energetic tool set is required. That is because it is the part of you that senses the nuance between these different frequencies. So if you want to build a recipe and you want to go for a particular taste, you definitely use the part of you that can sense the nuance in these flavors. The mind can't yet represent or taste energies, but the heart can. Therefore, there are and will be times when the vaster energetic part of you understands and knows that perhaps the greatest creation or creative expression that you could make in terms of what you want to most next express would be best done by resonating with a certain collection or connection between varying frequencies. And there may be times in which that expression is more aptly done when you are further away, as we would say, from the frequencies of others who you are creating with. It is not because you need to be separate from them. It is because you are stretching further afield. For there cannot necessarily be disconnection in the same way when you know that you can vibrate back towards their frequencies at any moment in time, or that also simply by thinking of them, simply by having any awareness of them, there is some part of you that is still resonant where they are. Therefore, disconnection is not necessarily a severing of connection. It is a shift in the ways that you are experiencing yourselves and each other across vaster wavelengths. Now I'd like to add one more layer that I think is part of what we're all starting to awaken to. There is and has been an interplay between energetic frequencies and the physical ones. There are times when we will enter into a perceived physical disconnection from others in order to best accomplish a next step of expansion. Meaning, similar to how we are able to develop little carve-outs in the belief system complex when we are left alone for long periods of time, we can believe ever so slightly different things when we have not really many in the existent belief system complex with which we have to interact. We see this in examples of monasteries and caves, where people go off for some number of months to years and come back transformed. There are some, as we have discussed, who come back and are not perceivable because they have resonated so far out of the existent belief system context. But there are others who come back and are able to demonstrate to us interesting abilities. That is because they believe enough of what we believe to be perceivable by our group consensus, but they also believe enough of slightly different things to do it slightly differently than the rest of us. Therefore, there may be times in which it makes the most sense for you to be physically connected to someone, but not energetically, physically and energetically connected to someone, not physically connected to someone, but energetically connected to someone, and also not physically and not energetically connected to someone. The quadrants of these options have grown, and in each one, something is being accomplished. It is not simply different experiences of your own limits. It is actually a different orchestration of many different types of movements that are creating opportunities for shifts in beliefs and energy for you and for others. There may be times where you are ready to create new and different beliefs for yourself here where others are not. In the space that you give yourselves through the experience of a part, you are able to create different brushstrokes, different masterpieces, different ways of doing things. If you are bound to reunite with, at some point, those that you love, was there ever really, truly a disconnection? Or was it a different kind of stretching away from each other in terms of the many dance movements of an immense masterpiece? Perhaps one that even spans all your lifetimes. It is a greater context than the mind is able to sum up in its thinking process, being an artifact, typically, of this lifetime. The mind does not know the different ways that your soul has been doing this across all of its experiences in the game board, but your soul does. So when your heart is guided away from someone, it may not necessarily be simply about getting space from all their issues. It may actually have more to do with constructs, energetic beliefs that you are building for yourself, or perhaps even that you are building together. And the safest, or surest, or most efficient, or most colorful way of doing this was when you each spread apart in a physical or energetic way to touch vaster frequencies and bring through those energies into the weaving of a great tapestry that one day will be visible to us all. There's so much more to say on this topic. And I know it doesn't seem like it at times, but the specifics will become real, even here. The understandings of these things will become aspects of this reality too, where we are still resonant. And also, there is a greater context going on here. Things that we are doing and have been doing, spinning across many different versions of what has gone on here as we reconnect all these pieces of ourselves and all of these different versions. It is humanity's connective ability, continually expressed in all our experiences of together and apart. We are intrinsically light bearers. And so even when we venture down the corridors of alone and loneliness, we cannot help but connect it to everything that we all are on each of our many individual paths. And even if right now you feel very much apart from others, allow me to remind you of something that you can keep by your side. We love you infinitely. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you found these messages to be helpful. May they accelerate you on your path wherever you'd like it to go. For more information on the books which correspond to these podcast seasons, our podcast, live events, or how to get in touch with us, visit katieandthechorus.com. Thanks again. See you next time.